They thought they were just cracking jokes about a freeloader with a cane. But the second a retired Marine colonel stood up, the entire tone of the diner changed. Leonard Triggs didn't need much these days. A warm booth, strong coffee, quiet place to rest his knee, the one the VA never really fixed right. He'd come to Darby's Diner in Macon, Georgia, every Tuesday and Friday morning for the last 6 years, always alone, always early, and always with that same worn cap that read 101st Airborne across the front. The stitching faded, but the pride never was. It was 7:12 a.m. when he walked in that day. Same old bell over the door, same creaky floorboard 3 steps in. He gave a small nod to Marla, the morning waitress with the lazy eye and the quick wit. She'd already poured his cup before he reached the corner booth. Leonard settled in, one hand resting on his cane, the other cradling the chipped white mug like it was something precious. Outside, the Georgia sun was starting to push through the clouds. Inside, the diner buzzed softly. Eggs sizzling, country radio low in the background, the occasional laugh from the kitchen. It was the kind of place where people came for routine, not excitement. That's why the group of 3 young men at the counter stuck out. They weren't regulars. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Loud. Dressed too clean for construction, but too casual for office work. One wore a backwards cap and boots that didn't have a single scuff. Another had his phone out, snapping pictures of his breakfast like he was at a food truck, not a roadside diner. The third, bigger than the rest, leaned against the counter like he owned it. "Check out Grandpa over there," the big one said, not even bothering to lower his voice. "Bet he's got a handicap sticker on his tricycle." The others laughed, but not hard. That early in the morning, everything echoes. Leonard didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared out the window at nothing in particular. He'd heard worse, a lot worse. But it wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the smugness, like they were performing for each other, or maybe for anyone else who'd listen. "Man probably hasn't worked in decades," the one with the phone added, shaking his head. "Bet he just lives off your taxes. That's where your raise went, huh, Cody?" The big one, Cody apparently, snorted. "That's why we're broke, bro. Whole countries carrying dead weight like that." At the booth behind Leonard, Colonel Matthew Halstead paused, his fork hovering over a plate of eggs. He looked up, not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to see Leonard, then the boys, then Leonard again. Halstead had the face of someone who'd seen real trouble and didn't bother reacting to fake ones. Salt and pepper buzz cut, broad shoulders even under a plain black polo, hands that stayed still unless they had to move. He didn't say anything yet, just waited. Meanwhile, Marla stiffened behind the counter. She looked at the boys, then at Leonard. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, but instead grabbed the coffee pot and made a slow loop around the room. Leonard took another sip. "You think he even did anything?" the third guy asked, voice louder now. "Bet he just bought that hat from a pawn shop." That one got a real laugh. Leonard didn't look over, but his jaw moved. Just once. Then Cody made the mistake of standing. He walked toward the bathroom, which took him past Leonard's booth. As he passed, he muttered, "Appreciate your service, old man," with a curl in his voice that made it clear it wasn't meant to be thankful. And that's when Halstead stood up. Not fast, not loud. But he stood, and when he did, the diner felt it. His chair scraped just enough to turn a few heads. He didn't look at Leonard. He looked straight at Cody, who turned just enough to notice him, then froze mid-step. Halstead's voice cut through the room like a breeze before a thunderstorm. Calm, sharp, unmissable. "I'd sit back down if I were you." But Cody didn't move right away, and now the whole diner was watching. Cody hesitated just long enough for the room to stiffen. He wasn't used to being challenged, not in places like this. Definitely not by someone who looked like he meant it. He sized Halstead up, older, sure, probably late 50s, early 60s, but built like a tree trunk. Halstead's arms were crossed. He hadn't raised his voice. Didn't have to. Cody gave a shallow chuckle and tried brushing it off. "Just kidding, man. Don't get all worked up." Halstead didn't blink. "You weren't joking." The air shifted. People who had been pretending not to hear were now pretending not to stare. A young woman with 2 toddlers at the corner table lowered her phone. The cook peeked out from behind the kitchen swing door. Cody shuffled back to his seat, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. "Dude," said the one with the phone, "are we really getting lectured by some retired mall cop or something?" Halstead turned slightly in his direction. "Marine Corps, Colonel, 26 years. And the man you're disrespecting wore the uniform too." The boy with the phone opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, Cody leaned in and whispered something that made them all chuckle again. But quieter this time. Leonard still hadn't spoken, still hadn't looked at them. He kept his eyes on the window, but his fingers tapped once, twice against the side of his cup. If you knew him, you'd know that was the closest he ever got to showing tension. Marla came by and quietly refilled his coffee. Her hand trembled slightly. "You good, hon?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Leonard gave the smallest nod. "I'm all right, Marla." But the room wasn't all right. It was holding its breath. Then the third guy, the one who'd kept mostly quiet, leaned back and said, "You people are so sensitive these days. Can't even take a joke. Guess everyone's a hero if they limp enough." And that was it. Leonard turned. Slow, deliberate. He looked over his shoulder at the table behind him where Halstead still stood, and then past him, straight at the 3 men. He didn't look angry, just tired. "I was 19, Leonard said, his voice low but steady. "I didn't sign up to be a hero. I signed up because my cousin came back in a flag-draped box, and I wanted to know why." No one spoke. He shifted in his seat and let out a quiet breath before continuing. "I've buried friends in 3 countries, carried a man's leg in my hands after a roadside bomb. And for what it's worth, I still remember the name of every single one of them who didn't make it home." His eyes moved to Cody. "You want to make jokes? That's your business. But if you think silence means I'm weak, you've got the wrong man." The diner was still. Only the soft hum of the fridge filled the gap, but Halstead wasn't done. He stepped around Leonard's booth, closing the space between him and the trio at the counter. "You think being loud makes you brave? That mocking a man who's already given more than you ever will makes you strong?" He pointed a finger, not to intimidate, but to focus. "Strength isn't in your voice. It's in what you choose not to say when you could. And right now, you're showing everyone in this room exactly what kind of men you are." One of them muttered something under his breath. The others just stared into their plates. A voice came from behind the register. It was Ray, the owner, who had been wiping down menus like his life depended on it. "You boys might want to finish up and move along. You're messing with a good man in the wrong place." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The 3 men looked around. There was no sympathy in the room. None. But one of them still hadn't learned. "Whatever, man," Cody grumbled. "Whole place acting like he's some kind of saint. All I'm saying is, people like him get all this free stuff, and the rest of us are out here working." Leonard stood up. It took effort. You could see it in the way he gripped his cane, the way his left leg dragged a little before catching his balance. He walked, slow and steady, and stood beside Halstead. "No free ride," he said. "I paid for it, piece by piece." But before anyone could respond, someone else in the diner finally decided to speak. The voice that broke the silence didn't come from the front counter or a nearby table. It came from the far corner of the diner, where a boy no older than 16 had been refilling salt shakers and wiping tables. His name tag said Elias. He had headphones around his neck and acne scattered across his cheeks. "My grandfather couldn't walk either," Elias said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He was in Vietnam, lost his leg. We buried him in his dress blues last fall." The kid wasn't looking for applause. His voice cracked a little, but he stood tall, clutching the plastic salt shaker in both hands. "He used to bring me here when I was little," he added, glancing at Leonard. "Said this place had heart." Cody muttered something again, but this time no one laughed. Halstead turned slightly, offering Elias a brief nod of recognition. "You were saying something about work?" Halstead said, his attention now fully back on the trio. "Let me tell you what work looks like." He took a step forward, his presence filling the space without needing to raise his tone. "Work is learning how to use your left hand to feed yourself, because your right one's gone. Work is training someone half your age to take your place and hoping they come back whole. It's waking up to your own screams and still showing up for breakfast." He pointed toward Leonard. "That man served 2 tours in Kandahar, got hit with shrapnel during a convoy ambush, refused evacuation until every last man in his unit was accounted for. Then he came home and spent a decade fighting the system just to get the care he earned." The 3 men sat like schoolboys caught in a lie. Even Cody, all bluff and bark a moment ago, had gone quiet. Halstead wasn't done. "I buried men who never made it back. Good men. Kids, some of them. I've delivered folded flags to mothers with shaking hands. And I've watched strong men be reduced to names on a wall." He paused. "What have you done?" No answer. "You work?" Halstead asked, but not sarcastically. "Good. Be proud of that. But don't pretend that punching a clock means you get to belittle someone who already paid his debt in full." He took a step back and added, "You think you're strong? Try carrying guilt every day for people who didn't get the chance to grow old." The weight of the room grew heavier with every word. No one moved. A fly buzzed near the pie display, but even that felt like an interruption. Leonard shifted beside Halstead. "You can't teach decency," Leonard said, eyes on Cody. "But you can remind people what it looks like." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry, but it landed. The young man with the phone, Tyler, according to the way Cody had called him earlier, finally spoke. "I didn't know," he muttered. Leonard didn't let him off the hook. "Didn't care to." Tyler looked down, ashamed. Cody crossed his arms. "Look, we didn't mean to—" "You did," Halstead interrupted. "But now you have a chance to do something better." Marla walked by then, placing a fresh pot of coffee on the counter without a word. She didn't look at the boys, just gave Leonard a slight glance and walked away. "Sometimes the best thing you can do," Halstead added, "is sit down and listen when a better man speaks." Cody looked like he was about to argue again, but the tension had drained out of him. Even he could feel the shift. "You know what?" he finally said. "We'll go." "Good," said Ray from behind the counter. "Before you ruin anybody else's morning." The 3 stood up, clumsy and awkward. They avoided eye contact, especially with Leonard. As they left, Elias cleared a spot near the window, watching them walk toward their truck. Leonard sat back down slowly, wincing as his knee bent. Halstead sat across from him without asking. They didn't say anything right away, but then Halstead leaned in, and what he said next wasn't for the whole diner. It was just for Leonard. Halstead leaned forward, elbows resting on the table like old friends do when there's something real to say. "I knew a guy like you," he said quietly, just loud enough for Leonard to hear. "Name was Reuben Klein. Rough voice. Carried photos of his grandkids like they were medals." Leonard gave a faint grin. "Reuben? From 3rd Battalion?" Halstead looked up. "You knew him?" "Trained with him in '86. He could do pull-ups with a busted wrist." "That's him," Halstead said, chuckling under his breath. "Lost him in Mosul. Man never stopped fighting, even when they told him to stand down." The booth went silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Not tense, just thick with memories. Leonard reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, laminated photo. He slid it across the table. It was faded. A younger Leonard in uniform, standing beside a group of soldiers, most of them beaming. One face stood out, Reuben, smiling like he didn't know what fear was. Halstead studied the photo, his jaw working. "Damn," he whispered. "So much gets lost." Leonard took it back and tucked it away. "Sometimes I feel like I walk around with ghosts, like they never really left, just quieter now." Halstead nodded slowly. "They're still with you. Every step." They sat like that for a few moments. No need to fill the space with small talk. Marla walked over and refilled both cups without asking. This time, her hand was steady, She placed a small plate of grits beside Leonard without a word and gave his shoulder the lightest touch before walking away. From across the diner, Elias kept watching. Not in a nosy way, more like someone learning something he didn't get in school. He picked up a napkin and quietly walked it over to Leonard's table. "Sorry if I overstepped earlier," Elias said. "Just couldn't sit there and not say anything." Leonard looked at him, and for the first time all morning, he smiled. "You didn't overstep," he said. "You showed heart. That matters more than words." Elias nodded and walked back to his section, cheeks red but proud. Halstead stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee. "I'm not here all the time," he said, eyes on the cup. "But when I see something wrong, I speak. Doesn't matter if I'm in uniform or not." Leonard raised his cup. "To the ones who still stand." Halstead raised his in return. "And the ones who can't anymore." They clinked mugs gently. At the front of the diner, the door jingled again. 2 women walked in, chatting softly, then paused when they noticed the quiet room and the absence of the loud trio. One of them, a woman in scrubs, glanced at Leonard and said, "Did something happen?" Ray looked up from the register. "Just a reminder." She didn't ask for more. From the back booth, a man in his 70s slowly stood up, using a walker. He made his way toward Leonard and stopped a few feet away. "You don't know me," the man said. "But I was at Khe-Sun. I saw too many young men die in red dirt. I've eaten in this diner for 12 years and never once thanked you." Leonard blinked, caught off guard. The man extended his hand, slow and shaking. "Thank you," he said. Leonard stood again, gently shaking his hand. "Means a lot," Leonard replied. "Really does." The man shuffled back to his table, and Halstead leaned over, voice low again. "You know what the hardest part of coming home was?" he asked. Leonard shook his head, realizing that some folks treat courage like it's a costume. They wear it when it's convenient, then mock the people who live it every day. Leonard stared into his coffee, silent. "You reminded them what real courage looks like," Halstead finished. But just as the tension had started to ease, someone else stood up, and what they said shifted the room once again. The voice came from the middle of the diner, clear, calm, and unfamiliar. It belonged to a woman in her mid-40s, with dark circles under her eyes and a nurse's badge still clipped to her shirt. She had just sat down minutes earlier with a to-go cup and barely touched her biscuit. She stood up slowly, holding her coffee in both hands. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she said. "I wasn't planning to say anything, but I can't leave without thanking both of you." Her eyes moved from Halstead to Leonard. "My younger brother came back from Afghanistan 4 years ago. The first year we thought we got lucky. Physically he was fine, but mentally he wasn't the same, and none of us knew how to help." Leonard looked at her, his expression softening. "He took his own life 8 months later," she continued, voice shaking but steady. "Didn't leave a note. Just left. Silent. Total silent." She took a breath. "Watching you two, watching this, it reminded me that people do care, that there are still people who stand up, who speak up. I wish someone like you had crossed his path before it was too late." Her voice broke at the end. She sat back down, dabbing her eyes with a napkin she didn't expect to need that morning. Halstead turned his cup in his hands, but didn't speak yet. Leonard did. "What was his name?" She looked up, surprised. "Jason?" Leonard nodded slowly. "He mattered." The woman's lips trembled, and she gave a small, grateful nod. From the back of the diner, another voice chimed in, an older man with oil-stained hands and a worn-out mechanic's jacket. "I didn't serve," he said, "but my dad did. Korea. Came home with a metal plate in his skull and nightmares he never talked about. I always thought he was just angry. Now I wonder if he just needed someone to listen." Heads around the diner began to slowly nod. Not in agreement, but in recognition. In understanding. Ray set down a stack of plates behind the counter and cleared his throat. "I served in Desert Storm," he said. "Never got a scratch, but I watched a convoy get hit outside Basra. 23 years old. We lost 2 trucks that day." Marla added quietly, "My uncle was drafted to Vietnam. Never spoke again once he got back. Not even to my mom." The diner wasn't just full of strangers anymore. It was full of stories. Shared pain, shared respect. Halstead looked around, then back at Leonard. "You don't realize how many people carry this stuff with them," he said, "until one person has the guts to stand in it." Leonard gave a faint smile. "We walk around thinking we're invisible. Then someone speaks up and suddenly, we're seen." Elias brought over 2 plates, one with bacon and eggs, the other with toast and jam. He set them down gently in front of Halstead and Leonard. "On the house," Elias said. "Boss says he doesn't charge for courage." Halstead grinned at Ray behind the counter, who shrugged like it was nothing. "You tell Reuben's story again," Leonard said, "when you get the chance. That man deserves to be remembered." "I will," Halstead replied. "Same goes for Jason." They ate in silence for a while. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Outside, the clouds had cleared. Sunlight stretched across the linoleum floor. Cody and his friends hadn't come back. They wouldn't. Not here. Not after that. Elias, as he wiped the next table, glanced at Leonard. "Can I ask something?" "Sure." "Do you regret it? Serving, I mean." Leonard paused, then answered. "Not for a second. What I regret is how quiet we let things get afterward. We come home and stop telling the truth. That's what lets ignorance grow." Elias absorbed the words like he knew they mattered. But while everyone seemed to be settling back into normal, Leonard's next words reminded them all. This was more than just a moment. It was a wake-up call. Leonard set his fork down and leaned back slightly in the booth. The pain in his knee was acting up again, but he ignored it. His eyes weren't on his plate anymore. They were on the window. Same spot he'd looked at earlier. But now, there was something different in the way he stared, like he was seeing beyond the glass. "You know," he said, his voice steady but quieter. "Sometimes I wonder what it's all worth." Halstead looked up from his plate. "People thank you," Leonard continued. "They shake your hand, they offer you a coffee or a meal, but then they go back to their day. And you go back to yours. The pain stays, the memories stay. The world moves on." Halstead didn't interrupt. He let Leonard speak. "I don't need parades," Leonard said. "I don't need speeches, but I do need to believe that what we went through meant something, that it changed the way people treat each other." He looked over at Halstead, eyes a little heavier now. "This morning? I almost didn't come in. Leg was acting up. Didn't sleep much, but something told me to stick to my routine." Halstead set his fork down and leaned in. "Sometimes it takes one moment," he said. "One table. One group of people finally paying attention." Leonard nodded. "And sometimes it takes someone like you to remind folks what courage looks like on the outside, too." Ray came by again, wiping the counter with exaggerated care. He wasn't in a rush. No one was anymore. "Place ever get this quiet before?" Halstead asked him. Ray smiled. "Not since that time Marla burnt a whole tray of biscuits and set off the smoke alarm." Marla, from the other end of the diner, called out, "One time, Ray!" The room let out a soft wave of laughter. Real, relaxed. Like pressure had been released. Leonard chuckled. "Good to hear people laugh. Haven't heard that much since my unit's last reunion." Marla walked over and slid into the edge of their booth, just for a second. "You want to talk about what happened earlier?" she asked. Leonard shook his head. "No need. We handled it." She gave him a look that said more than words could. "You know," she added, "this place feels different today. Like it mattered we all saw that." Elias popped his head out from behind the counter. "I'm going to ask to do a school project on this, if that's all right." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "On breakfast?" "No, sir," Elias said, almost formal now. "On respect. On what it really means." Leonard smiled, eyes crinkling. "Then I'd be honored." Halstead stood and pulled a few bills from his wallet, setting them on the table. Ray raised a hand. "Nah, this one's on the house. You've paid your dues." Halstead hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Appreciate it." He extended a hand toward Leonard. The shake was firm, honest, and didn't need to last long. "You ever come through Fayetteville?" Halstead said. "You look me up. We'll swap stories over something stronger than coffee." Leonard smirked. Deal. Halstead walked to the door and paused. He looked back at the room, at the faces now watching him, not with curiosity, but with respect. Next time someone's getting picked on, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, don't wait for a uniform to walk in. Then he pushed the door open and stepped into the sunlight. Leonard stayed a while longer, sipped his coffee, stared out that window again. He didn't need to rush. Eventually, he stood and made his way to the counter, cane tapping steadily against the tile. He looked at Ray. Don't let them stop coming, Ray. The loud ones. Let 'em come. But make sure they see what they need to see. Ray nodded. They'll learn, one way or another. Leonard glanced at the door, then back at the tables full of people, pretending not to listen. Today, they saw it. But as Leonard stepped outside and felt the warm sun on his back, something settled in his chest. A sense that maybe this wasn't just a good morning. Maybe it was the start of something better. The parking lot outside Darby's was still half full when Leonard stepped outside. His old Buick sat under a tired oak tree, sun bouncing off its hood. He took his time walking across the lot, his cane clicking with each step, the pace slow but sure. At his car, he paused before getting in, leaned against the door for a second, looking back at the diner. Through the window he could still see Elias clearing a table, Marla wiping down a ketchup bottle, Ray laughing with a couple at the counter. It looked like a normal day again, but he knew better. Normal had shifted. He slid into the driver's seat and sat with the door open, one hand on the wheel. He wasn't in a hurry. Something inside felt different. Lighter, but deeper too. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old dog tag hanging from a leather cord. He turned it in his fingers. It belonged to a friend. One who didn't come home. I hope you saw that, Jerome, he whispered. I hope you saw what it meant. Behind him, the door of the diner opened again. The nurse, the one who spoke about her brother, walked toward her car. She noticed Leonard and stopped. Thank you again, she said softly. He looked at her with kind eyes. You don't have to thank me. Just remember him. Talk about him. Make sure they know he mattered. She nodded. I will. Leonard smiled faintly. Then that's all I need. As she left, Leonard sat for another moment, then finally turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed to life. Before pulling out, he looked at himself in the rearview mirror. Not to fix anything, just to take in the face looking back at him. Worn. Sure. A little tired, but steady. Alive. He backed out slowly, then pulled onto the road heading west. Not home yet. He'd take the long way around, pass through the back roads he hadn't seen in a while. Windows down. Let the air carry some of the weight away. Inside the diner, life returned to its pace. The morning rush had passed, and a calm had settled in. But something unspoken lingered, like a lesson left behind on each table. Ray leaned over the counter toward Elias. You'll remember today, he said. I already do, Elias replied. I want to be like them, not the loud ones, the real ones. Ray gave a small grunt of approval. Then start by showing up, for people who need you. No one's too young for that. Back at Leonard's booth, Marla placed a clean coffee mug upside down, the seat still warm from where he'd sat. Some stories don't need headlines or cameras to matter. They happen in real places, between real people, and they stick because they remind us of what we forget too easily. That kindness takes strength. That silence, when it replaces truth, is dangerous. That dignity isn't owed, but earned and defended. And sometimes, all it takes is one man standing up, so others learn how. If you're watching this, maybe you've seen something like this happen. Or maybe you've stayed quiet when someone needed you to speak. Next time, speak. Not for applause, not for credit, just because it's right. Subscribe if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. And if someone you love wore a uniform or stood up for what's right, tell their story, loud enough that someone else learns from it. Because someone's always watching, and what you do next might be the story they remember.